We'll see what happens here in a second.
Test, test.
You should be able to hear better in the dark.
That's what the liberals say.
Still can't hear it.
Not gonna work? Oh, that's too bad. Well, what you can do for those who have access to a computer at home is go to X, formerly Twitter, and
I'm trying to set up this stripe.
just
Okay,
search
there you
for
go.
Jim
So you just
Ferguson
go up there.
and Freedom Train International. You'll like it. Or you could just actually go to and Google Jim Ferguson or Freedom
Let me
Train
just do a
International.
take of the room here. Just quickly. Be right back. Let's just show everybody. Guess we're all here. Bonnyville. You guys can see. People here.
We have
People here. Saw that crowd.
What do you think?
This event is in Bonnyville, Alberta.
He's a cardiothoracic surgeon and critical care specialist.
How's the audio? I hope that you can hear.
Heart and lung transplantation program. During his
How's the audio, everyone? Can you hear?
served on the finance committee of successful provincial conservative governments since the Eddie era. He is the founding member and chair of the Alberta Prosperity Society Project. He is a fiscal conservative, student of the Canadian Constitution, and is here to speak to us on the benefits of provincial...
Can you give me an audio check? Can you hear well? Awesome. Awesome. I'll go to the front so you guys can hear better.
I'm not that tall, but something to be adjusted. So thank you very much, everybody, and thank you, Dennis, for your introduction. Before I start, what I'd like to do is just give a shout out to all of the volunteers, because without them we could never pull off these events. So please join me with giving them a round of applause. So how many of you are here for the first time to an APP event? Oh, wow, wonderful. There's quite a few of you, that's great. And how many of you who are here are already on the independence train? Okay, and how many of you here are here to find out more about what Alberta sovereignty can offer you? All right, how many of you are not yet on the independence train? Okay, most of you are on the independence train, and some may be too shy to admit it, and that's okay. But I'm going to start off the way I've started off, because there are so many new people here. I was going to avoid this part,
good.
but I'm going to start off just briefly talking about vegetables. Okay. George Bush Sr., the former president of the United States, used to say that he hated broccoli. When he was a kid, his mother forced him to eat broccoli, and now that he's the president of the United States, the true story, he said, no one can force me to eat broccoli. That would be understandable. Which brings up a recent poll that was conducted, and the question posed was, what is the most hated vegetable in Canada? And unsurprisingly, it turned out to be Trudeau.
How's the audio, everyone? Can you guys hear okay? How's the audio?
Well, I've probably got most of your attention now, but I'm going to go on, because there's also this very distraught woman who is sitting at the confessional, and she says to the priest, "Father, forgive me, for I have sinned horribly." And the priest says, "My dear, what is it that you did?" And she says, "Well, last night I killed a politician." To which the priest responds, "My dear, I'm here to listen to your sins, not your community service." And that's with respect to any politicians or former politicians who might be here tonight. All right. So if we look at the last federal election, what do we see? We see that Alberta, Saskatchewan, Central and Northern BC didn't vote the way the rest of the country voted. And why is that? Well, it's because our values, our principles, our culture are different here compared to many other regions in the country. And when speaking of values, is anybody here concerned that our new Prime Minister could be worse than our former Prime Minister?
Yes.
Yep, already is.
When you look at his book Values, he makes some statements in his book, and I'm going to quote a couple of them. He claims that Western civilization is morally rotten, corrupted by capitalism, which has led to a climate emergency.
Smart.
And he claims that this will require rigid controls, not just controls, but rigid controls on personal freedoms, business, and financial institutions. Now, the businesses that he's referring to are the businesses involved with the development and transport of our natural resources, as well as agriculture. And the financial institutions are those institutions that require rigid controls on them to limit or stop the financing of those industries that I just mentioned. And he promises, or actually he says, I do not promise that life will be better for our people, he says. In fact, it will be worse. Less flying, less travel, less meat, more inconvenience, and more poverty. And then he goes on to say, assets will be stranded. Well, what does he mean by that? He means that businesses are not going to be able to survive. There will be some businesses that will not be able to survive. And that your internal combustion engine vehicles will not be saleable. And of course, as many of you know, the target date to end the sale of any ICE vehicle is 2035. And how does he expect to achieve these controls on everybody? Well, he's got an answer to that as well. One of them is censorship. So you'll only get one narrative, you'll only get one truth, and that will be the federal government's truth. And you're seeing that if you pay any attention to the mainstream media, which are bought and paid for by the federal government. But he also intends to do other things, such as restrict access to your accounts, to force compliance. And we've seen that play out during the trucker convoy, right? But he can do so much better in terms of controlling your access to your accounts, to force compliance to federal dictates, with the central bank digital currency and a digital ID to track everywhere you go. So this is a dystopian future that I think most people, in fact, if not all people that value freedom, would not want to see happen to us. And why this is so relevant for Alberta is because Alberta has the capability, it has the population, and it has the drive to actually lead this movement to freedom and prosperity. Now, I just want to touch on sovereignty, just the term sovereignty for a second. It sort of means independence. But when you're sovereign, it means there's nothing above you. There's nothing above God, for example. But as an individual, you're sovereign as well. And what happens when you give up your sovereignty? You don't even know it, but when you are regulated and then over-regulated, you're giving up control of your ability to purchase the goods and services that you want. When you give up your hard-earned wages to a government that doesn't respect the value of your dollars, you're also giving up some of your sovereignty. I mean, in a very simple way, sovereignty is pragmatic. It's freedom from persecution. And when I say freedom from persecution, what kind of persecution am I referring to? Well, political persecution, economic persecution, cultural persecution, religious persecution, and regulatory persecution. Can any of you think of any of those forms of persecution that you feel as though you've experienced any of that? I'll bet a lot of you do feel that way. But some don't even think about it anymore because we get used to the way things are. So, how did it get to this point? How did it get to the point where we feel as though we need to become sovereign as a country? Province becoming a country. How did it get there? Well, it's pretty simple because the fix was in when Alberta and Saskatchewan joined Confederation September 1, 1905. Thanks to the efforts of Sir Clifford Sifton, who was the Minister of the Interior in the Liberal government of Sir Wilfrid Laurier. But it's what he said to an audience in Winnipeg in 1904 that was prescient. And when you understand what he said then, you'll understand why we are where we are at now. So what he said in 1904 to this audience in Winnipeg are these words, quote, "We desire, and all Canadian patriots desire, that the great trade of the prairies, by the way, is Alberta's wealth. Canadian patriots at that time were the people living in the east, because obviously Alberta and Saskatchewan hadn't joined yet. So we desire, and all Canadian patriots desire, that the great trade of the prairies shall go to enrich our people in the east, to build up our factories and our places of work, and in every legitimate way contribute to its prosperity." Did anybody hear in those words anything about the prosperity of the prairies and the West in general? No. Since then, September 1, 1905, we were incorporated as a colony to serve the interests of the East. And over the last 120 years, we continue to be a colony serving the interests of the East, to be pillaged and plundered for our wealth, and to have values shoved down our throat that don't align with our values here in the West. And that's what we've been facing. How has this manifested itself economically? Well, since Equalization, the national energy policy, federal confiscatory tax policies and regulations, we've given to Ottawa some $800 billion for which we've not received a cent in return. And speaking of the national energy policy, many of you will remember that, but it's worthwhile touching on because it relates back to what Clifford Sifton said in 1904. So in the 70s, prior to the 1980 energy policy, Alberta was booming. People and businesses from elsewhere in Canada and around the world were moving to Alberta. Why? Liquid gold, oil. All 5 major banks were moving their head offices to Calgary, and one did, CIBC. But what happened after the 1980 national energy policy? Alberta was devastated. People lost their businesses, they lost their homes, businesses moved out of the country, out of the province, generally to the US or elsewhere. People committed suicide. It was a mess for the next 15 years. But did Ottawa care? No, they didn't care. And Marc Lalonde, who was the brainchild of the national energy policy, has famously stated that the reason for implementing it was because we could not let Alberta become the center of economic power in Canada. Think about that in relation to what Clifford Sifton said in 1904. But something else was going on in 1980, and that was the Quebec secession referendum. And so you can envision, for example, the federal government extremely nervous that Quebec was going to leave, and that referendum missed by a fraction of a percentage point, bought Quebec's loyalty to Canada with Alberta's wealth, which is why you may now understand why Quebec gets 2 of every $3 of equalization payments. They get about $14 billion a year, and we contribute about $14 billion a year to equalization. Let's look at more recent times. In the last several years, the Premier has pointed out that $500 billion, $500 billion of planned investment into Alberta didn't occur. Why? Federal regulation and taxation. There was no business case. As Trudeau said, there was no business case for a lot of things. But that money was invested. It just wasn't invested in Alberta. It was invested elsewhere in the world. And then if we look at, for example, opportunity lost. The Frontier Centre for Public Policy a few weeks ago revealed a research paper which evaluated how much money does Alberta lose every year because we can't get our oil and gas to Tidewater, to international markets. It's staggering. 26.5 billion every year is what we lose because we can't get our resources to Tidewater. And then if we look at, well, how is Canada doing internationally? If you look at international, or if you look at growth, economic growth, in all industrialized countries in the world, Canada is dead last. Dead last. Why is that? With all the massive natural resources and talent that we have in this country. Federal regulation and taxation. It's not complicated. That is what has happened. So, what can we do about it? Well, we could, for example, say, let's negotiate with Ottawa. How has that worked out? It hasn't worked out very well. Over the years, it simply has not worked out. There have been constitutional challenges that have failed. There's been legislation that's been challenged. And right now, the provincial government has some 18 lawsuits against the federal government in various aspects of the development and transport of our resources, natural resources, on censorship, on property rights, particularly the firearms confiscation program that may be implemented. And so we have a difficult time preventing these things from occurring that are occurring because we don't have the leverage to be able to deal effectively with the federal government. And by the way, you know, the federal government wants to be, the Liberal government wants to be the federal government in perpetuity. And you know, here's something else that they're doing. They want to lower the voting age to 16. And on top of that, they want to implement a universal basic income for every person who's 17 at the age of 17. So that's $2,000 a month. So do you think those two things might generate some loyalty to the Liberal Party? But what does it do to our young people in terms of creating a culture of dependence on the federal government, which is exactly what they want? To hollow out the middle class, to create an underclass and an elite class, right out of the playbook of the World Economic Forum. I'm not making this up, it's all out there. So, if we look at what we've been doing provincially, you know, I have a lot of respect and some degree of admiration for Premier Smith. She's smart, she's articulate, and she can get a message across. And she's standing up for Alberta, rhetorically. But do her actions actually match her words? So let's look at a couple of things, because I think it's relevant to understand this. She implemented the Alberta Sovereignty Within a United Canada Act, right? And ostensibly, that act was designed so that the provincial government would have clout in dealing with the federal government. The Alberta government is frustrated because of federal overreach of provincial constitutional authority. It's been going on for a long time and it keeps getting worse. So you look at what the Constitution says belongs to Alberta control, and then you see regulations or statutes, forms of legislation on top of that. One simple example, without getting into all of them, is the Canada Health Act. How many people here are pleased with the way our healthcare system has been performing? Yeah, well, that's part of the problem, because we can't necessarily do everything that we want to do to fix it. So, but let's get back to Premier Smith and rhetoric and actions. So, what she could have done, which she didn't do, and which would not have required a referendum, it only would have required the courage to do this, and that was to take control of provincial policing, pensions, immigration, employment insurance, and provincial tax collection. A Maggie Thatcher would have done that. She would have done that. I've been trying to get the Premier to become a Maggie Thatcher, but I haven't won yet. But we can keep working on it to give her a spine to do some of these things. Now, just to make a sharp point on the difficulty of dealing with our federal government, if you want to make real change, you have to be able to open and change the Constitution. And we'll take the issue of the referendum in 2021 on ending equalization. 62% of Albertans voted to end equalization. What's happened? Nothing's happened. Why? Nothing could happen. Because in order to open and change that Constitution, there are 4 hurdles plus 1. And just for education purposes, I'm just going to touch on them very briefly. Number 1, hurdle number 1, you have to have 7 of 10 provincial legislatures representing 50% of the population voting to open the Constitution and end equalization. Number 2, in the House of Commons, where we do not have representation by population, you have to have a majority vote in the House of Commons to end equalization. Number 3, it's exactly the same thing in the Senate, so that's hurdle number 3. And then number 4, Quebec has a de facto veto, and they never even signed the 1982 Constitution Act. And then finally, if there's a constitutional battle at any point, if there was a 1 in quadrillion chance that we could get through the first 4 hurdles, then it would be adjudicated by the Supreme Court. Now think about this. How is the Supreme Court constituted? 9 justices, they all have to be fluently bilingual, which precludes most of the rest of the country, legal system, lawyers, and judges. And all 9 of those justices are appointed from the Prime Minister's office. 3 are from Quebec, 3 are from Ontario, 1 from the Maritimes, 2 from all of Western Canada. So how do you think we ever win at the level of the Supreme Court?
Good luck.
We don't. Not very often. But Jeff Rath is going to talk. He's a brilliant constitutional lawyer, and he's going to talk to you about his success at the level of the Supreme Court on behalf of the Indigenous population, or he may touch on it. So where do we go from here? Well, there is only one solution, ladies and gentlemen, and it's a legal solution. And that is to use the Clarity Act, which is the legal pathway for Alberta to leave Canada. All right, now, just to touch on a couple of key points in the Clarity Act. Number 1 is that it was designed subsequent to the 1995 Quebec referendum on secession, which missed by a fraction of a percentage point. And the federal government posed the question, does a province have the unilateral right to leave Canada? And they posed the question to the Supreme Court. So there's a long analysis, which is interesting reading for anybody who likes to get into that stuff, that defines not defines, but points out or concludes that there is, the province does not have the right to unilaterally secede. But from that analysis, the Clarity Act was created, and the Clarity Act has these key points in it. Number 1, if you want, for a region to leave Canada, you have to have a successful referendum where a plurality of the eligible voters vote in favor of leaving. Number 2, well, I guess prior to that, the question has to be a clear question. So clear question, plurality, and then you have to demonstrate that you've consulted with other interested parties like the Indigenous people, other political parties, etc. And then that would lead to negotiations. And the fourth paragraph of the preamble of the Clarity Act says negotiations might lead to secession. But it's not so clear, because what happens if negotiations don't lead to secession? Okay, what does it might lead to secession mean? Well, it means that the referendum is successful and there's agreement between the province and the federal government. But if there isn't agreement, then what? Well, that's unclear. So the Clarity Act isn't as clear as you might think it should be. But fortunately, we can look at something else, which I understand is the analysis that the Supreme Court did is supreme to the Clarity Act. So there's two key regions in the Supreme Court analysis of the question that was posed to them by the federal government. And this is important to understand. In Section 154, it makes reference to the legitimacy of a country holding a referendum on secession if the people of that country feel as though they've been subjugated, dominated, exploited, and that their self-determination has been thwarted or compromised or prevented. So does anybody here feel as though we've been subjugated, dominated, exploited, and our self-determination limited? Raise your hand. All right. So armed with that, then Section 155 is also relevant, because what it says is that, in essence, if another country acknowledges a successful referendum in a region, that country has now political legitimacy to claim its sovereignty. And so this is not novel. This happened in 2008 when Kosovo, following a successful referendum, declared its sovereignty. And that was in February 2008. 1 month later, two countries acknowledged Kosovo's sovereignty. One was Japan. Can you guess what the other country was? Canada. So it'd be rather hypocritical, wouldn't it, to have a successful referendum on sovereignty, and the US acknowledges that Alberta is now a sovereign country, for the federal government to not acknowledge it. But I can tell you this, subsequent to that successful referendum, we strongly believe that the US will acknowledge Alberta's successful referendum and acknowledge Alberta's sovereignty. Then Premier Smith, and I'm not sure that would be her title during this interim period, would be able to be negotiating with the federal government on the terms, on the outcome of Alberta being sovereign. In other words, what happens to border control, what happens to the debt, what happens to the pension plan, various other things like that. So now I'm going to leave you with a thought and a question. The thought is that we believe that on July the 4th, the provincial government, through the Citizens Initiative Act, has lowered the threshold from 600,000 signatures on a petition to force a referendum to 177,000. And wouldn't you know it, we already have far more people registered to support that petition right now.
Thank you.
So I'm going to leave you with a question. And the question is, and it's a good one that you can use when you're talking to other people that aren't yet on the independence train. If Alberta was already a sovereign country, would you want Alberta to join Canada under the current terms and cost of membership?
Heck no.
That's a question you can ask them. The corollary to that question, though, is this. Do you understand where you are right now in your own financial circumstances? How much taxes you pay, that if you're on pension, that you pay taxes on your pension plan as well. You understand exactly how much you're paying. And if you're still working, for example, and you're making, just ballpark figure, $100,000, and you're paying $45,000 to $50,000 in taxes, and when I say taxes, I don't just mean corporate taxes if you're running a business, or personal taxes, but the other 18 or 20 taxes you may be paying as well that you don't even know about, and you don't even know about the regulatory costs. But what if you could be paying, instead of $45,000 or $50,000 on a $100,000 income, you're paying $10,000 or $15,000. That's the difference economically between Alberta being a province in Canada and Alberta being free and prosperous. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Muldring, for your inspiring talk. We appreciate your valuable insights. Now, I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Mr. Geoffrey Rath is a constitutional lawyer with over 2 decades of experience. He's a leader in his field with his expertise and knowledge having been pivotal in representing the First Nations communities and his representation in constitutional law for our Indigenous leaders. He is General Counsel on the APP board and is a leader and supporter of Alberta independence. Please join me in welcoming our Mr. Geoffrey Rath.
Wow, what a great turnout tonight. I'd like to thank everybody that came out tonight to listen to us talk about Alberta independence. It's so important that all of us as a community come together, and those of us that support independence share, what you learned at these meetings and share your belief in a strong, free, and prosperous Alberta with the rest of your family and friends to keep our movement growing. So about a week ago, it was funny, we were outside of Medicine Hat in the German-Canadian Club. And as I looked around the German-Canadian Club, it reminded me actually of my military service when I was a young soldier in Germany. And of course, I remembered one night that I was having a drink with one of my colleagues from then the German Bundeswehr, and we were having a beer, and he goes, "Oh," he says, "Rat," he says, "your last name," he says, "it's German." And I said, no, I said, "My family's from Eastern Austria, it's Austrian." He says, "Oh," he says, "you know what we Germans say about you Austrians?" I said, "No, what's that?" He says, "You're very sneaky people." And I said, I beg your pardon?" He said, "Oh yes," he said, "only the Austrians could convince the world that Mozart was Austrian and Hitler was German." So speaking of Hitler, Mark Carney is an existential threat to Canada and Alberta.
Yes, he is.
And when we talk about the need to get Alberta out of Canada, we don't have time. We don't have time for, long-term strategies that people were, advising people to take, 5 and 10 and 30 or 40 years ago. All this West wants in stuff, is all done by yesterday's Federalists. They still want to talk about that. They still want to have constitutional conventions, where we get Alberta and Saskatchewan and Winnipeg or Manitoba together so we can all talk about how we're going to come together and how we're going to change the Canadian Federation. The time for that is over.
Probably
Mark Carney is a
400,
real
500
and present
people,
threat
I would say.
to our families and to our lives and our livelihoods in this province. And we do not have time for all of these failed strategies of yesteryear. From my perspective, the only way forward is straight ahead, and that is specifically for all of us to work together over the next 12 months and to have a successful referendum on one single question. And the question, I think, as everybody knows, I normally bring my board with the question on it, and I don't have it tonight, but the question is very simple. It's, do you agree that Alberta should become a sovereign country and cease being a province of Canada? Yes or no? And of course, the issue that we have going forward now is that we have all of yesterday's Federalists, like our good friend Jason Kenney, right? All of us worked together to throw his fat ass out of office and put him back on waivers where he belonged. You know, and again, keep in mind, whether it's Jason Kenney, Pierre Poilievre, or any other politician espousing, you know, the views that somehow or other Alberta is better off within Canada and we're not going to be better off, you know, independent and so on. I asked them, you know, one simple question, okay? Here are, like, let's just give it a quick top 10 list of why Alberta is going to be so much better off out of Canada. First and foremost, no more federal regulation of Albertans. No more gun grabs. No more, oh my goodness, I'm afraid of the weather. We need to make up taxes to tax the weather, because if we tax the weather will get better. You know, none of this nonsense anymore, right? You know, no more emission caps, no more threatened production caps, no more people claiming that oil and gas produced in Alberta is somehow dirty, you know, when they're not happy to have our dirty oil flow through their province, but boy, in Quebec, they're sure happy to take our dirty money. Yep. $15 billion a year leaves this province for Quebec, while we have to borrow money to hire our teachers, pay for our doctors, pay for our nurses, build our roads. We're borrowing $5 or $6 billion a year to operate in Alberta, while we're sending $15 billion a year to Quebec. Now let that sink in. Now, you know, when we talk about what's going on with Alberta money leaving Alberta for the rest of Canada, including CPP and UI, the net outflow of tax dollars, CPP money and UI money leaving Alberta is $70 billion. Let that sink in. What do we get back? We ostensibly get back, allegedly, $30 billion in federal transfers, including a paltry $3 billion for our pensioners, and less than $20 billion in health transfers and other transfers coming back to the province of Alberta from the money we send to Ottawa. Where does the rest of it go? Well, I guess we heard the other day that Mark Carney wants to curry friends with all of his buddies in Europe, because we all know he's more European than Canadian. Yep. There's going to be $225 billion leaving Canada. Of course, who's paying for the bulk of it? Alberta, right? Going to Europe, to various defense contractors and whatever else in Europe, so that the Liberals can have a new round of graft and corruption, getting their fingers in all of these contracts in the middle of all of this money, in all of these new contracts, which we all know there's going to be Liberal middlemen from one end to the other on those contracts. You know, they want to completely change our defense posture. Even though 75% of our trade from Alberta goes to the United States, Mark Carney doesn't want to buy weapons from the United States anymore, or be closely tied to the Americans for defense, because he thinks that the United States of America is an existential threat to Canada.
Boo.
Now, he might be right in one sense. Myself and Dr. Modry traveled down to Washington back in April, and we met with very senior officials in the US administration, and I can report back to you that the people we were meeting with wholeheartedly support Alberta independence. And that's not Alberta as a 51st state. The briefing documents we provided to American officials were clearly, you know, about Alberta independence, not 51st state. The briefing documents that the Americans had were referring to an independent Alberta, not Alberta as the 51st state. The Americans recognize as much as we do that while there are some of us amongst the independence movement that favor an immediate union with the United States, the simple fact of the matter is that's not a practical reality. It also requires the agreement of the United States Senate, the United States Congress, you know, a number of other steps, you know, that would have to take place before that happens. And then the question a lot of us ask, and this is why Alaska almost didn't become a state, is why do we want to pull ourselves out of Canada and the clutches of the CRA, only to put ourselves under the jurisdiction of the US Treasury, you know, the IRS, American taxes, American regulations, and so on, when we can have a government in Alberta that's responsive immediately to our needs without a bunch of bureaucrats that don't understand us, whether they're in Washington, Ottawa, or Mark Carney's plan. He would love to see Alberta or Canada join the European Union, if you can imagine anything so stupid, right? So, we would literally, be able to have a made in Alberta government responding directly to the needs of Albertans rather than some bureaucrat in Brussels. And this is one of the things, one of the things that I put out, or that I always think about is, the simple statement, I want to be governed by a bureaucrat in Brussels, said no Albertan ever. And this is the future that Mark Carney has planned for Canada and for Alberta. More regulation, more taxes, more stupid ideas like the giant $50 billion carbon sucking machine that they want to build to so-called decarbonize our oil, right? I mean, has anybody heard anything so stupid? Decarbonized oil? I mean, I sort of always understood, oil and gas as hydrocarbons, so hydro being water, carbon being carbon. So if we decarbonize oil, are we left with water? Is that the plan for the future? Has Mark Carney developed some magic water burning machine that we're not aware of that's going to completely transform the economy of Canada and the world overnight? I don't think so. And the reality of it is, all of these plans and policies that we're trying to get out from under when we talk about Ottawa and Toronto and Quebec City for that matter, they're based on sheer stupidity. If anybody remembers the start of the phony tariff war that Trudeau started, my favorite was Doug Ford in Ontario jumping up and down and turning red in the face, talking about how he was going to teach the Americans a lesson because they were going to shut off Alberta oil to the United States. Of course, the problem for Doug Ford and Gibault and the politicians from Quebec who thought this was a great idea was they literally didn't know that the Alberta oil that flows to Ontario goes through something called Enbridge Line 5 down into the United States and then up through Enbridge Line 9 to the refineries in Sarnia. So when Doug Ford was talking about shutting off Alberta oil to the United States, he was literally talking about what a lot of Albertans have spoken about for years, which was namely, let the Eastern bastards freeze in the dark, because Doug Ford was going to shut off Ontario's oil to spite the Americans because Doug Ford was too stupid to know that Ontario's oil from Alberta flows through the United States. Then, when somebody told Doug Ford that he couldn't do that because there is no east-west pipeline, then the idiot Gibault, Stéphane Gibault, I refer to him as the gibbering Gibault, he literally is like being quoted publicly, he's shocked that there's no east-west pipeline. Like, didn't know there wasn't an east-west pipeline. He'd been fighting against one for, his entire life, but he didn't know one didn't exist. And then he started, oh my goodness, if we go to shut off Alberta oil and it can be shut off in the States, maybe we need an east-west pipeline. Of course, that epiphany only lasted with Gibault for maybe a week or so, and then he regained his senses and then started talking about how we were at peak oil and nobody needs oil anymore, and the TMX pipeline was already, is only at 40% capacity, which is a lie, so that we don't need any more pipelines. And of course, that's where we find ourselves now, that's where we find ourselves now. Mark Carney claims that he's going to create an energy corridor. Well, do you notice the one word that he never talks about is oil and gas corridor? He doesn't talk about a pipeline corridor. He says, oh, well, maybe we could have a pipeline, one pipeline, provided there could be a national consensus for that pipeline. Well, we all know there's never going to be a national consensus. I mean, Quebec would sooner sign the 82 Constitution than allow a pipeline from Alberta through Quebec. Mr. Eby, Premier Eby from BC, has already said no to another pipeline from Alberta going through BC, yet our Premier continues to say, oh, I'm on Team Canada. And what I keep asking myself is, how long are you going to play for a team where every time you turn around, somebody's elbowing you in the mouth or high-sticking you in the face and knocking your teeth out? Because that's effectively what's happening, is that we live in an environment where we have Carney and all of the people around him paying lip service to Alberta's aspirations, but we know at the end of the day, not only are they not going to deliver them, but every time we turn around, they are going to make our lives worse and worse and worse, because that's what they do and what they have always done. It's like the old Vegas maxim, never bet against a streak, because that's what we're dealing with. So, what we all have to get our heads around is that in the context of an independent Alberta, we are going to be so much better off than we would be in Canada. No more federal regulation, no more federal income tax, no more carbon tax, no more capital gains tax, no more wealth tax, no more, and the new one they want to bring in, home equity tax. There's $4 trillion worth of wealth in people's homes. Well, we better get that because, we don't want people feeling that they're too wealthy or owning their own homes, because God knows all of those homes should go into foreclosure to be bought up by Brookfield and BlackRock and all of the other World Economic Forum partners that are planning our futures for us without our input, and certainly not for our benefit. All of these things that we're seeing going on in real time are real, and they are not for our benefit. Dr. Modry alluded earlier to the beautiful Liberal plan for universal basic income. There could be no greater attack on the culture of this province than to completely destroy the industriousness of our children. In Alberta, we have one basic agreement between all of us. That Alberta culture consists of a bunch of hardworking men and women who care about their families, who want to get up in the morning, who want to go to work hard, take care of their families, save money, and literally enjoy their lives as free as possible from any and all forms of government interference and government regulation. It's a pretty straightforward approach to life. But what the Liberals want to do, and you heard Dr. Modry talk about it, the companion bill to the Universal Basic Income Bill is a bill to lower the voting age to 16. And why do they want to lower the voting age to 16? Because the Universal Basic Income Bill puts $2,000 a month into the hands of 17-year-old children as guaranteed income, whether they're going to school, whether they have a plan to go to school or stay in school, whether they have a job, whether they have a plan to get a job, whether they have a plan to further their education or their future. They just get $2,000 a month to stay home and do nothing. So, and if you ask the average 16-year-old, hey, do you want to vote Liberal? If you vote Liberal, they're going to give you $2,000 a month and you don't have to go to school or work anymore. How many of our 16-year-old kids that don't have the benefit of good, guidance from their parents would say, hell yeah, where can I vote for that? This is the future that the Liberals have planned for Alberta, and literally, within less than a generation, we're not going to recognize the province that we grew up in. So on a going forward basis, all of us need to internalize what the benefits of independence are going to be. And again, I've listed through some of the benefits dealing with taxes. We're in the process of working on and through APP, working on and finalizing a draft fiscal plan for an independent Alberta. So we're looking at that $70 billion a year that leaves the province, and we're imagining what the province would look like if that money were to all stay in the province of Alberta and to be spent on all of the things that the federal government currently spends it on, but within Alberta. So external affairs, Indigenous relations, airports, border patrol, border security, customs, immigration, all of those things, right? So when we run the numbers where we're currently at, we're looking at a $30 to $50 billion a year fiscal capacity surplus in the province of Alberta if we would just stop sending money to Ottawa. Let that sink in. Right, and the plan that we put together, it's a very, very, we call it a conservative plan. We're not costing in, completely gutting, the Alberta bureaucracy, which we all know needs to happen. We're looking at the same levels of services. We're looking at, leaving healthcare exactly the way that it is, et cetera, et cetera. And at the end of the day, we have a $30 to $50 billion fiscal capacity surplus that could be applied to tax savings in year one. Lower pension rates, in terms of payments in, higher payments out to our pensioners. All of those benefits would accrue to an independent Alberta. So, I think it's probably a month and a half, 2 months ago now, I wrote an open letter to Premier Smith and I said, look, these are all the benefits of Alberta independence. Can you please tell us even 3 benefits of staying in Canada and that exceed the value of independence. So why is it more valuable to every individual Albertan to stay in Canada as opposed to being independent? She can't offer us one, right? At best, oh, well, I'm working with Mark Carney and we might get a pipeline. Oh, and we're doing this and this might happen or that might happen. None of that benefits any of us directly, not as directly as, having your taxes cut by 30, 40, 50% in year one. By year 5, if we got some of these pipelines through the additional leverage that comes from independence and being able to negotiate these things with Canada as an independent country, or alternatively, by opening our border with the United States, entering into a common market with the United States, where we have no tariffs on either side of the border, and we have complete free trade on all goods and services between Alberta and the United States. A lot of people that I've spoken to think it would be a very easy thing to do to negotiate at least two or three more pipelines into the United States, including one through Montana, Idaho, and Washington State to Tidewater in Washington rather than going through BC. And for every additional... and according to Danielle Smith, for every additional pipeline we get, and keep in mind Keystone XL, thanks to President Trump, is back on the drawing board, and I understand from friends at TCPL, they're working away to get Keystone XL back online. But for every new pipeline we get, that's another $20 billion in revenue to the government of Alberta, or that'll accrue to Alberta. So, Keystone XL will be up, that'll be another $20 billion in revenue, and we get even just 2 more pipelines. That's for a total of $60 billion in revenue. Our fiscal capacity surplus will go from $90 billion a year to $110 billion a year, which would mean within 5 to 10 years, we could have 0 income tax in the province of Alberta.
Very well.
That's the future for an independent Alberta, as opposed to what we've been living in, which is an ongoing nightmare where every time we turn around, we're being visited by some fresh hell from Ottawa or the World Economic Forum that don't care about us as a people, disrespect us continually, don't like our culture, don't like Albertans. We go to Ottawa to protest, they invoke the Emergencies Act and trample little Indigenous women with riot horses because they can't stand us. So as far as I'm concerned, and I think I've said this more than once, and I think this is the point, that I'm going to close on, is that everybody needs to keep in mind. I don't like the word separatism because we're not separating. We're working forward, and as a people, we are declaring our independence from Canada. Canada separated from us the day that they declared the Emergencies Act against us and seized our bank accounts without our permission and did all of the other underhanded and dirty things that they've been doing. So anyway, I just want to say how happy I am that I made the 5-hour drive from my ranch today to come to Bonnyville. It's been a long time since I've been up in this neck of the province, and it's beautiful. I think it's a lot nicer on a June evening than it is at -40, but
Yes.
we get that weather down south too. So I'm really happy that I made the drive, and I just wanted to say how proud I am and how happy I am to be able to see a room full of Albertans that are dedicating themselves to the same project that we're all working on, which is namely for the benefit of our children and the benefit of our grandchildren. Let's get Alberta the hell out of Canada.
Roberta!
Thank you, Mr. Jeff Rath, for your insightful talk, and we truly appreciate your time and expertise. We will now have some buckets circulating around for those who would like to make a cash donation. And we thank you for all of your support for this important project. I'd like to now introduce our final speaker of the evening. We have Mr. Mitch Sylvester, the owner and operator of Sylvester Sporting Goods. A well-established store in Bonnyville since 1989. Mitch is actively involved in political advocacy. He chairs the Alberta First Pension Plan Initiative and is the CEO of the Alberta Prosperity Project. Mitch is an advocate for the people and speaks with honesty and integrity. Please help me welcome Mitch Sylvester.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. As usual, you don't disappoint me. Kill the lights for me, please. to the ledge. Anyways, let's start with April 28th. What happened on April 28th? Our whole world changed. My whole world changed. That was probably the most depressing day that we have had, or I have had, probably in a very long time. That didn't have anything to do with the death of a family or anything like that. April 28th turned me from who I was before into somebody completely different, based on the fact that it was on that day that I understood that we were never probably going to have another conservative government in Canada. Based on everything that's going on. It was on that day that I went from having an independent Alberta within Canada to thinking that that was just not possible. That the only path forward is to absolutely leave Canada. And that was a hard day for me because had Pierre Poilievre won, we would have got pipelining, we would have changed the gun laws, everybody knows I saw guns, everybody here knows I saw guns. That would have made my life quite a bit easier, way easier. I wouldn't have had to go on the road, we wouldn't have to do all the things that we're doing to force this issue, because we would have got a hiatus of about 4 or 5 years. But I'll share something with you. All that would have done was delay.
Thank you all for watching.
That's all that would have done. We would have just delayed this. Because the system is working exactly the way they want it to. Confederation is working exactly the way it's designed to work. Take all the wealth from the West for the benefit of the East. Now just try and understand who these people are. Everybody says, oh, the Laurentian elite. Who are these people? Would we like those people? I know for sure they don't like us. That's an absolute for sure. But would we like those people? So these are the people that are telling us that we have to stay poor. And they want us to stay poor. And their actions show us that they want us to stay poor. Their absolute mission in life is to eliminate the middle class for their benefit. When did that start? Well, that started in 1980. The boys alluded to this, but here's the screw the West, we'll take the rest, and then our guys said, let those Eastern bastards freeze in the dark. So we haven't liked each other for 45 or 50 years. The reality of it is that they are different people than us. They vote Liberal. Now just understand what just happened, right? We lost an election. The same cabinet came back, led by a more capable leader, right? So by the time I'm done here tonight, you'll understand my frustration, I hope. All right, let's start here. Alberta's net contribution to Ottawa is more than $244 billion from 2007 to 2022. Now just compare that to everybody else. Like this is Alberta's deal compared to everybody else. Look at the number. The next closest one is BC, which is a quarter of what Alberta gives. Now also go down far right and see Quebec. They got $327 billion. Is Quebec a have-not province?
No.
Nobody believes that Quebec's a have-not province. So what's the deal? The deal is if they take $15 billion away from Alberta every year, that's going to make us poorer. That's going to make us have less money. And if we have less money, then we have less options. And that's the thing with money. Money creates options, it creates wealth, it gives you the ability to make things better, as opposed to not having money, which does entirely the opposite. And the pension, understand this, in an independent Alberta, you will keep your pension. You can live anywhere in the world and get your pension, because your pension has a portability clause. It allows you to live in Argentina or Mexico or Poland or anywhere and you can get your pension. You will also keep your Canadian citizenship, because our Prime Minister has 3 passports. So that's not going to affect you. Okay, the government of Canada doesn't take away citizenship. As a matter of fact, they've got some kind of immigration plan going on here, whereas if you're an immigrant and you're a Canadian citizen, they're trying to extend that to your extended family, you automatically become a Canadian citizen. And I'm not even joking. So understand this, let's go through the numbers on Canada pension or Alberta pension. CPP, we pay $9 billion a year to CPP. Our seniors collect 6. So there's a $3 billion difference there. In the original Canada Pension Plan Act, Ontario, because they thought they were going to pay too much, said that this has to happen. What has to happen is If we overpay, our money will go into a fund for us. And then we will be able to call that money back at any time with interest. So according to the LifeWorks report, that number for Alberta is about $380 billion. Now that started us going down the path. Now understand how much money $380 billion is. We're $100 billion in debt in this province. Right now, after 120 years, we're $100 billion in debt, but that $380 billion asset could be called back by the Premier anytime she chooses. And she said to me and a lot of other people that calling that pension plan back was a no-brainer. So why hasn't it happened? Because the CPP has been, the Canada Pension Plan money that we have has been put on the federal government's balance sheet. Not on Alberta's balance sheet, but on their balance sheet. So it allows them to have better credit, borrow money at a better rate, and do all that manner of stuff. So are they going to give it back to us? Not likely. There's people in this room, including me, that wonder if that money is actually still there. And I know that I'm not by myself because I see lots of nodding heads. But the point is just look at the graph again and see how much Alberta pays compared to everybody else.
No, let's go attend the Rose with it.
Not even close. Now, equalization payments, we'll go through that. This is going to take no time. BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan don't get any equalization money. There's Quebec with its $13.6 billion. And in order to qualify for that, they don't put their biggest industry on their balance sheets. So understand that. So that's not very fair. That would be like us not putting our oil on our balance sheet. So that makes them eligible to get money because they're poorer than us, apparently. But no, that's not the plan. And this is the year before or year after. Same thing, same graph. A year later, guess what? Next year's going to be the same thing. So in 13 months, Quebec gets $27 billion from Alberta. Now here's something that should have been on the front page of every paper in Canada for 2 months before the election. Understand that we no longer have a free press in this country. If we did, it would have said that Western society is morally rotten according to our Prime Minister, and I'm saying this again because it needs to be said again, just so you understand, and that it has been corrupted by capitalism, which has brought about a climate emergency, and this, he claims, requires rigid controls on personal freedom, and that is all you should need to hear. The minute our Prime Minister is telling the people in advance that he's going to take your rights and freedoms away in a democratic country, I think we should be alarmed. I think we should be very alarmed. And what else is he saying? He's saying assets will be stranded. Okay, so let's just talk about the cars. They've been arguing about cars in Parliament right now that in 2035, everything's going to have to be electric. Okay, now that's everything. So don't buy a truck in the near future because in 2035, it's not going to be worth anything. And the problem is that we can't ignore that because they're actually doing it. So my question to you is why? How is that going to benefit you, Canadians, who live in a country that gets to 25 or 30 below zero, and the car won't go from Fort McMurray to Edmonton without a charge, because I know that for a fact. So how does that benefit you? So what is the government trying to do to you? Trying to keep you home. Understand that? They're trying to keep you home. They're showing you that. And they're showing that by what they do. So this is going according to exactly what I'm trying to tell you. Should we be alarmed? These are the reasons why I don't think this is fixable. Brookfield, just remember that name. That is Mark Carney's company. Okay? They have lots of money invested in electric cars. In that. That's what they do. The survey shows that this is close. I think we can win this. We're just going to have to work really hard. I think that once people understand the numbers and once people understand what's really happening in Canada, I think this is a no-brainer. Understand what's at stake here. The whole world covets our industry, our resources, and everything that's here. We have enough oil underneath Alberta to pay the entire national US debt. Okay, understand that.
Amazing.
We have agriculture, we have natural gas, we have clean water, we have everything that we need to have here, but the world sees this. Historically, wars were fought over what the neighbors had that they wanted. This is a war, but it's an economic war. Now understand, if you were going to try to take over a nation without firing a shot, what would you do? Exactly what they're doing to us right now. When I became premier, this happened in Bonnyville, the premier said this, when I became premier, I thought I could fix everything in 6 or 7 months, but everything is broken. What does that mean politically? That means the government is so corrupt that it cannot be fixed. That's what that means. Pierre Poilievre says the same thing. Everything is broken. Go find it on YouTube, it's there. Donald Trump, actually, I don't care if you're a Trumper or not, but whatever, he said the same thing. Everything is broken. So that means after 105 years, the Westminster system, which is based on honor, you've heard the Honorable Mr. Justin Trudeau, you know what that means, actually, what that actually means?
Entitled, yeah.
That was designed back in the day when kings and queens depended on the people that worked underneath them to be honorable, and if they did anything to embarrass the monarch, they had to resign.
Oh, there you go.
All right, so just understand what that is. So now what I'm going to ask you is this. How many times did Justin Trudeau embarrass the monarch in the last 10 years?
So many.
Countless.
And unapologetically. So here's the real reason why we have to go. Because our politicians are above the law, and the law doesn't apply to them. And if they're above the law and the law doesn't apply to them, how can we possibly run this system?
Yeah. It's not possible.
Now, Mr. Plett, who's a senator, spends an hour talking about all of the crimes that the Liberals committed. Ethics violations is what they call them. So an ethics violation is a crime. 82 ethics violations by the Liberal government means that it would have brought down any other government before that, one of them, 82 of them. So if there's 82 ethics violations, and they replaced the same cabinet that was there before, only with a new leader, are we being led by criminals, is my
Yes.
question to you.
Yep, 100%.
So if we cannot put these people in jail for breaking the law and for taking money from us, then we absolutely have no other path than to do what we're talking about. We have to leave. Because we have to start all over. We have to start all over with a new kind of government, something that's not corruptible. Because this is the situation we're in, like it or not. It's like we go to the doctor and the doctor says you have cancer. You can admit that you have cancer, you don't have to, you can leave the doctor's office, but it's not going to change the fact that you have cancer. And that's what's happening here. We have to act, we have no choice but to act. And if we don't act, we will suffer the consequences forever and ever. Danielle has said, you got to do this, 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 and this. This is a line in the sand. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any difference. If he builds a pipeline and they steal all the money, what difference is that going to make to us? Okay, let's not ignore the last 10 years, just in case you forgot. We'll go through that a little bit at a time. Okay, Alberta government admits that COVID restrictions are all about political power and control. They were testing us.
Yeah.
It didn't stop transmission, it didn't stop infection, that's known today, that's a fact. They were testing to see how far they could push us and get away with it. That's what COVID was all about. They were testing us. And they pushed us quite far. Did you ever think in your lifetime that we would be talking about censorship in Alberta and in Canada? I certainly never. So understand one thing about censorship. Censorship is, you get all your information from one place, but you don't know what you don't know. So that's the beauty of censorship. The beauty of censorship is they can keep telling you stuff, and you're not understanding, you're not seeing what you're missing. And the other thing that's a beauteous thing about censorship, as far as they're concerned, because they play a very long game, is that they can put in your kids' heads what they want. So just understand that. So your children are being fed information by people that are actually putting thoughts and controlling their thinking. That's how serious this is.
Is the audio
I
still
want you
good?
guys to wrap
Can you
your
guys
head
hear
around
okay still?
Everybody in the room that's a farmer, I just want you to understand. Now, I want you to pretend that you're in the room with them when they're making this law. So Bill C-293 says that in the case of an emergency, they will come to your farm and seize your land. And not only will they seize your land, they will seize your herd.
Awesome,
That's
thanks.
legit. That has actually happened. So why would they do that? Because they want you to be poorer. It's a very constant theme. It's very easy.
Anybody who hasn't subscribed, please do be
They want
solid
to
and
make you
subscribe.
poor.
Thank you.
They're attacking us economically by making these rules, by making this red tape, by creating all this nonsense. You have to be in the room. You have to understand what they're thinking. They're playing a long game here. This may not come into action until this year, next year, maybe 10 years from now. But 10 years from now, they're going to have that in their hip pocket. They're going to say, well, look, that's the law. You can come to your farm and take your stuff. So does that mean, if they can do that, do you have any property rights? Now here's another one. China hits Canada with retaliatory tariffs on canola oil. All right, so why would they do that? Because we put a tariff on a Chinese electrical car. 100% tariff on a Chinese electrical car. So why would we put a tariff on a Chinese electrical car that nobody in Canada owns? Really, why would they do that? They would do that so they understood that they could tariff our canola and our peas and our pork and our seafood. So what does that do? That hurts us. That makes everything way more expensive. So as a consequence to that, it does the same thing. It makes our producers poorer and it makes our people poorer. Oil demand is going up every year. Now let's talk about landlocked for a minute. So landlocked is what we are. But what we really are is policy locked. So I'm going to explain that to you. So if, for example, we became an independent country, we wouldn't have to adhere to the rules that Canada has made. So we could actually stop every train coming from BC across Alberta and tell them that we're going to tariff their goods because China, which is close to BC, sends all those containers, those sea cans, to the port of Prince Rupert, and then it has to come across Alberta to go to the rest of Canada. So what would we say to them? Like, I don't know, I'm not the boss, but I understand this. I would say, hey, we're going to tariff every container that crosses Alberta unless you let us build a pipeline across BC.
That's it. That's it. That's it. Unless they want to go through the Northwest, I guess.
But let's go to the Alberta-only stuff. C-69 blocks pipelines. Tanker ban on the west only. Understand that the tankers bring oil, Arab oil, into Quebec every day. Every single day. That's an Alberta deal. They don't buy Alberta oil, but they get $14 billion a year from Alberta. Right? Understand that. That's the way this works. So understand Confederation is working the way they want it to work. That would create a lot of jobs for Alberta boys and girls. That oil that Quebec's bringing in from the Arabs. Why are they doing that? What happens in business when business is good? You accumulate wealth, it allows you to grow, it allows you to expand, it allows you to pay your employees more. It gives you stability. Again, that money was spent somewhere else, it was spent in the Gulf Coast. Not only that, just remember that Trudeau said we don't need to sell Germany natural gas or Greece or Japan. Those are three pretty solid people that you want to sell natural gas to. Why is that? Quote, it was not in our plan. So what is the plan? The plan is to make sure that we stay broke or broker. If they had built Northern Gateway, and if they had built Keystone, we would have 2.5 million barrels more per day, which is $55 billion worth of GDP every year. But that's also not in their plan. They pulled the pin on this $11 billion refining project, but they doing the carbon capture that Jeff was talking about. That carbon capture is going to go from Fort McMurray to Bonneville. They're going to suck CO2 out of the air, they're going to liquefy it, put it in a pipe. You can't measure that, by the way, and that's part of the problem, right? You understand that, right? There's no measuring what they're taking, and there's no measuring what they're putting in the ground, and there's also no measuring the effect of it. And that money is going to come from your pocket, and instead of spending that money on something like this, which would generate wealth for 50, 60 years, you're going to spend it on something useless like a carbon capture program. Now here's where the rubber meets the road. Guys are old enough to remember when the Norwegians came to Alberta, they came here to see how we run our oil patch and to start an oil fund. Okay? Today, Norway has $1.3 trillion in an oil fund, and they started after us, and they don't produce any more oil than us, and we are broke. We're $100 billion in the hole. So that $1.3 trillion oil fund at 5% interest would pay every bill we have in Alberta. We wouldn't even have to collect taxes from anybody. So I'm asking you a question. How come?
Yep. Why?
How does that work? Are you okay with that? And I'm going to also make this point very clear to you. Today is the day that we could start that oil fund. But the only way we're going to do it is if we leave the country. So your kids and your grandkids will have the opportunity to take advantage of that, and that's part of the decision that you're going to be making right now. And not only that, not only are they doing all that stuff to us, they're putting a cap on production. So they're taking the money and they're killing the cow. By putting a cap on production, it's going to cost us 55,000 jobs, that's according to our premier. Again, what is the purpose of this? To hurt our economy, no other purpose. Now here's my second favorite slide. The carbon tax has cost Canadians billions of dollars over 5 years, hurting the economy while reducing CO2 emissions by 11.9 gigatons. China emits 11.9 gigatons every day and a half. Every day and a half. And they're increasing their CO2 production by 10% a year. Oh, wildfires. Here's a stat. 100 out of 111 fires in Manitoba are now confirmed, set by people. Who are these people that are setting these fires, that are trying to tell us that climate change is causing these fires? Taxing people into poverty is not going to change the weather. Here's my favorite slide. Now understand this. This is ridiculous, but I'm going to read it to you. These are the taxes we pay. Carbon tax, personal income tax, corporate income tax, goods and services tax, excise taxes, fuel excise tax, alcohol excise duty, tobacco excise duty, cannabis
Dick is
excise
gone
duty,
now.
excise duties other than alcohol, tobacco, and cannabis, customs duties, air traveler security charge, luxury tax, provincial territorial tax, capital gain tax, land transfer tax, media tax,
Dick was a
regulation
tick.
tax, CPP tax, business tax, estate tax, and now they're coming for the money that you have in your house. What do you think? And I want to tell you something. Do you understand what estate tax is? Here's what it is. I'm going to break it down for you. Just say, for example, that your parents paid $200,000 for their house. And then when they died, it was worth $1 million. So they will give you a $200,000 credit based on the original price, and they will charge you 65% tax on the $800,000. 65% tax on the $800,000. So not only are they trying to break you, they're trying to break your kids. And this is after-tax money. This is money that was paid after taxes. And then they see that $4 trillion that is out there that's in your home, so they're going to tax you year after year after year on your house if it's paid for. Just understand that. Is that a little ridiculous? Is that overreach? Now, the federal government cannot give you anything. that can to make you stay in Canada that would match losing all this. You could get an immediate 20%, 25% raise right today if we took all those taxes out. And a 65% estate tax is absolute lunacy. And we shouldn't stand for it. And the money that they do get, they transfer to these people. These are very corrupt countries. Money laundering does exist. Money laundering does exist at the government level. Please understand. And then, here we go. Out of the $187 billion worth of liberal infrastructure spending, finds 20,000 missing projects, not 2,000, not 200, 20,000 missing projects, and here's the thing. Our Prime Minister, our new Prime Minister said, well, you know what, that happened in the last term. We're not going to worry about that. And that's the truth. He did say that. He did say that on the ArriveCan app. They had, they charged somewhere in the neighborhood of, I don't know, 100, 200,000, $200 million for an app that got people into Canada, but the company that did it didn't build apps. So they gave them $16 million, and the Conservatives said, well, they've still got that money, let's go after them. And Prime Minister Carney said, well, no, we've just had an election, so all that stuff's in the past. They printed, what, $330 billion during COVID with no audit. That's also in the past, don't worry about that. But it went on the debt. It went on the debt. And just as they were going to have that election, because they found another $400 million missing, they broke Parliament because they didn't want to answer the questions. The Liberal speaker said, you have to answer these questions. And the other thing that was on the table was foreign interference. Foreign interference in an election. Remember 2 years ago when they talked about foreign interference, CSIS said, you know what, that's a problem. But our Prime Minister said, no, it didn't affect the outcome of the election.
Of course
How the
not.
hell would he know that before the election? Just a question. Oh, this is funny. Honest to God. You gotta understand, Ontario is absolutely anti-gun. Doug Ford got his house broken into 2 weeks ago.
That's
Now he wants to shoot him.
there you go.
Don't you love that? I love it. I think it's fantastic. Here we go.
Unbelievable.
All right, all
Yeah, I
political power
remember.
comes from the barrel of a gun. The Communist Party must command all the guns. That way no guns can ever be used to command the party.
Yeah.
So what's happening in Canada today? They've got a new minister coming to grab the guns. Now we just talked to the Premier and we gave her the idea of having an Alberta gun license so they can't come
Don't
here
give up your
pretty much
guns,
and talk
guys.
about it.
Keep
So
your
nowhere
guns.
that came from. That came from us. But I want you to understand something. Mao killed, that's Mao Zedong there, he killed 60 or 80 million people after he took the guns away. That's more people than live in Canada. And Cambodia did the same thing. The Russians killed 60 or 80 million people, they did the same thing. And don't think first, you gotta be naive. Well, you don't have to be naive, but I'm gonna explain to you, I would be concerned, is a better way to put it, if we allow these people to take our guns based on their track record and what they're doing right now. That would concern me mightily. Whereas in the US, they understand this, that a well-regulated militia is being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. The American
So that's the Second Amendment. You know what the First Amendment said? You should have free press, the right of free speech, and if that's not working, then you go to the Second Amendment and they'll take care of that, make sure that the First
There you
Amendment
go.
works.
Exactly.
That's right.
All right, and here's, I'll let everybody read this one. All right, we've got a fentanyl issue in Canada. We've got an opioid crisis. What's happening there? What's happening there is we're losing 22 kids a day.
Ugh.
In the US, they're losing 135,000 kids a year to opioid overdoses, and that's more than they lost in all of their military action in the last 75 years, including Vietnam and Korea. And that was the problem that caused the tariff war in the first place, is that President Trump said it's all coming from here. And understand this, we do not check more than 1% of all the sea cans that come into Canada. Understand this as well. In Valley View, Alberta, they found 6,700 kilograms of fentanyl-making chemical there in one of the labs there. 6,700 kilograms, 14 tons. How much fentanyl, which is like the size of a grain of salt, will hurt you, will that much chemical make? There's 4,000 organized crime groups in Canada, according to the RCMP. Foreign interference is the greatest threat facing Canada. The foreign people that are interfering want our resources and they want our land, but they don't want our people, apparently. Now here's the other biggest problem. 2 million immigrants, just understand that, 2 million immigrants coming into Canada every year. So they have to build an entire city the size of Edmonton every year to accommodate that. And, look at that.
Yeah. Here we
A
go.
refugee can get $224 per day with no tax.
That's
It's
disgusting.
unreal.
How interesting is that? So there's 5 million people that are work visas are going to expire here at the end of this year, and they don't know where they are.
Yeah, of course not.
So ladies and gentlemen, finally, here's the deal. We're threatening the federal government. Danielle said, if you do not do this, it'll affect national unity. Well, unless we become a very strong populist movement, she will not get anything out of the East. So like it or not, we're the stick.
We have to
We
meet
have
it.
275,000 people, we will call the referendum. I will be there on the morning of July 4th to put our question in. We will call the referendum. This is going to happen.
Let's go.
And finally, if you haven't suffered enough, it's
The
your goddamn
referendum's
right to
coming.
suffer more. Thank you very much.
Referendum's coming, people.
There. I'd like to thank Mitch for his compelling comments and for sharing his insights with us this evening. Now we'll come to the last portion of our meeting, and that's our question and answer period. But before I do that, I just want to thank BONNYVILLE for having us here. And our greatest commodity is the volunteers who have organized and helped with this evening's event. Our volunteers are vital to our success, and we sincerely appreciate each and every
Please,
one.
everyone, subscribe if you haven't subscribed. I appreciate it. Thank you guys so much. Hit that like button and subscribe. Thank you. Appreciate you all.
There's 2 flyers that you saw on one of the tables. They all have a QR code, and if you haven't made a pledge, please do. And if you aren't comfortable using a QR code, there's a telephone number on one of the sheets, so you can actually phone a live person. But it's better if you could use a QR code because it just gets put in electronically. It's a lot faster and accurate.
Thank you. Thank you.
So now we'll have a mic at, just one last thing is that the tables will be open for membership or merchandise after the Q&A. So they'll be open for about 20 to 30 minutes. So we'll have a mic, and we are all, if you can just stay in the
It's gonna
center.
be the Q&A, guys.
If you have any questions?
Questions and answers.
Center,
Maybe
and
one of your questions will
we'll go
come
one by
up
one.
and you'll hear the answer.
Question to
Stick
any
around.
Of our 3 guests.
Move on to the- Yes. We're good, Colin. What's that?
Gentlemen, great speeches, really enjoyed everything that was presented here. My question is about corruption. All 3 of you talked about the deep corruption that exists in Canada, especially in the federal government. My question is, how are we going to ensure that in a newly founded state of Alberta, that we're not going to create a situation where that type of rot can take root again? George Washington famously said that you cannot have a properly governed society or nation without God and the Bible. And of course, in our society, historically, we've had Judeo-Christian values, which fundamentally kept people honest to some degree. And Mitchie talked about that, this concept of being honorable and right honorable. And so, if we're going to be the most prosperous nation in the world, that's a lot of temptation. So I'm just curious about, has any thought been put into, for example, what type of a culture we're going to have? How are we going to ensure that in this new Alberta, that we're going to have the right kind of people in government and not produce a political class that's going to be just as corrupt as the ones who are ruling over us now? Thanks very much.
Good question.
Well, that's an excellent question coming from a friend and a brilliant constitutional lawyer himself. So I would answer the question this way, is that we've drafted an interim constitution which would be implemented subsequent to a successful referendum, which acknowledges the supremacy of God. And it acknowledges...
That's right. God-given rights.
It acknowledges not just the supremacy of God, but the superiority of the Ten Commandments as being foundational to civil society and the rule of law. So that would be embraced in a new constitution. Now, with respect to corruption, we learned a lot from the U.S. Constitution. And you can see that in the U.S. Constitution, there have been many amendments that were made. The interim constitution that's been drafted has more checks and balances than in the U.S. Constitution, along with smaller government, which means less to monitor in terms of government corruption, but also the idea of quarterly auditing of every department. And just to give you an example of how important this is, let me just touch on one thing. In the $75 billion Alberta budget, $28 billion goes to healthcare. Now, in 1995, the population of Alberta was 3.8 million people, so keep that number in mind, 3.8 million people, 1995. And the number of employees for Alberta Health, which is what it was called, was 5,000. Fast forward to today, and now I can't say what changes have been made in terms of the numbers because there are changes to the system. But up until very recently, like within the last several months, the population of Alberta has increased from 3.8 million to 5 million. But the number of employees with Alberta Health Services is 130,000. Gone from 5,000 to 130,000, but the population's only increased by 1.2 million people. Ask yourself the question, is there fraud, waste, and abuse in the system?
Just a bit.
And if there's fraud, waste, and abuse in the healthcare system, do you think there could be some fraud, waste, and abuse in some of the other departments?
100%.
And then that's magnified probably manyfold with respect to federal governance. So imagine all of the waste of money that is occurring there as well. So Leighton Gray, friend, constitutional lawyer, the answer to your question, I think, is embraced in my comments thus far, and I think we have a real opportunity. You're never going to eliminate corruption altogether, but we have a tremendous opportunity to dramatically limit it and to hold elected officials accountable for the first time. Mitch didn't mention this point, but the last time a politician was charged and went to jail was in, what, 1923, was it? 1923 or 22. So we have an obligation
Gotta ask.
And a new sovereign country of Alberta has an obligation to all of you and all citizens to ensure that corruption is, if not eliminated, dramatically reduced. Thank you for your question.
I also want to add one thing to that. So in my last discussion with the Premier, we actually discussed this for quite a bit of time, actually, and her idea is a direct democracy like Switzerland is running. So that means that the people actually get to vote on everything, and the MLAs don't get to vote on anything. So that will help eliminate a lot of corruption. They've been running that system for 335 years in an area of the world. And the other thing that I really like about the Swiss system is that they train their boys and girls as 16 and 17-year-olds how to become soldiers. And they're also very neutral. They don't go to war, but they send them home with their automatic weapons, so that every house has an automatic weapon and a trained soldier in it. And I like both of those things. So that's
Well done.
I have a concern and a question. My concern is with the reduction of the referendum signatures required going down from 600,000 to 177. If you can't get 600,000 signatures in that time, what makes you think that you have the support to win the referendum? Because if you have the support to win the referendum, you should be able to get the 600,000. That's my concern. My question is, the numbers that you guys presented, I can't argue them. I think they seem pretty, I'm going to say, optimistic. And they're wholly dependent on stasis of the current world order. What makes you think, or what assurances do you offer? Because I can't believe that current America wouldn't immediately landlock Alberta, economically starve us out and force us to join the States on their terms. If we don't negotiate some kind of an agreement with the States prior to declaring independence, why would you? I'm sorry. Quickly then, my question was, if we don't negotiate some kind of a deal with America prior to declaring independence, assuming we win a referendum, what assurances, or from where do you get your confidence that the states wouldn't landlock Alberta, economically starve us out and force us to join on their terms? And I don't have an opinion, actually I do, I'm very favorable to a 51st state option, but if we don't negotiate that very carefully, why would you be confident that they wouldn't economically kill us to get us?
Well, that's an interesting question. As President, so I'll answer your second question first. When we met with the U.S. administration, they made it very clear that they wanted Alberta to be a sovereign nation, with or without Saskatchewan. And you may recall that President Trump has made the case that earlier that he wanted continental-wide security and energy security. So you're correct that it would be possible for something like that to happen in terms of being obliged to the U.S. But I don't really think that that's going to be the case. I think sane minds will prevail. The U.S. could help facilitate the transition from provincial status to sovereign status. The U.S. Could help us deal with some of the difficult negotiations with the federal government. There would be trade-off benefits, for example, and it's hard to predict ahead of time exactly how those negotiations would occur. We have another meeting, not yet scheduled, but it's in the works, to meet with the U.S. administration. Very likely that'll happen after the petition, because we can assure the public, we can assure the U.S. administration that the petition can be successful, because all we need to do is collect 177,000 signatures, which, since we've got more than we need already, that should be a no-brainer, and we've got 120 days to do it. That then obligates the provincial government to hold a referendum. Now, prior to the referendum, you're absolutely right that negotiations with the U.S. should take place.
Hey, Jay Peterson, I'll try to ask that question. Raising my hand to see if I can ask that question for you. Just a sec.
But we do have sway. And when I say we do have sway, this is what I mean. You know, the UCP party has about 250,000, about 50,000 members. We already have 5 times that many members, so we do have some control. Now, with respect to your first question, that's a really good question as well. So the question is in relation to the lowering the threshold from 600,000 to 177,000. I was never worried about the 600,000 because we just needed to spend the time to get there. But there is something interesting that has occurred. Notwithstanding that the threshold has been lowered, you could interpret that because it was the provincial government that made that happen to modify the Citizens Initiative Act. You could interpret that by understanding that maybe the provincial government wanted to get there because right now there's an imbalance in power, federal government, provincial government. That referendum provides leverage to deal more effectively with the federal government. But let's look at why we think we're winning on this right now, because I think that's important to understand. When you look at the polls generally range from a third of the population polled to as high as 47%. But we also live in an interesting time, and that is we live in an era of cancel culture. When polls are conducted, very frequently people do not want to say how they feel about particularly a controversial subject. You take the US election as an example. The majority of the polls in the US did not predict a landslide win by Trump and the Republicans, correct? And by the same token, there's lots of evidence that people do not want to respond to controversial things. But I think it was Lloyd Snellgrove that made the point to me, a really good question to pose in a poll, and we should do this, Mitch, and that is, instead of posing a question, how do you feel about sovereignty, pose the question, how do you think your neighbors feel about sovereignty? And then maybe you get a more honest response. I like that idea, and we should probably do that. But here's the other thing, is that, and I have no evidence for this except to give you the fact, and then you can surmise what you want to surmise. But let's look at the referendum on ending equalization. 62%, that was in 2021, 62% of Albertans voted to end equalization. How many of that same 62%, recognizing that to end equalization requires opening and changing the Constitution, which is impossible, would be in favor of supporting a referendum on Alberta sovereignty? I don't know the answer to that question, but it's an interesting proxy to think about. So that's the best response I can give you to your 2 questions, but thank you for asking them. Mitch has got something to say.
Okay, well, we're going to take one more question after that because it's been a long evening, so whoever that person could be is fine. But I'm going to share something with you about putting people on a list. I've been chasing this around for 15, 16 months trying to put people on a list. We had 37,000 signatures for Alberta pension after 100 town halls. Nobody wants to put their name on a list after COVID. And I'm going to tell you what, that 600,000 people was going to be a stretch. I had tons of people telling me they're going to vote for independence, but they're not putting their name on a list. So just FYI, I think that would be a problem. Because I've lived it, I see it every night. I've said lots of people say, hey, you know what, I don't want to put my name on a list, any list, even though, of course, they're already on the list.
Yeah.
That's the mentality.
Am I good to go?
Okay, one more question.
Hey, Dr. Mondre and Mitch. So I have a question from one of my subscribers on the live stream. The question is, what are the hurdles that we would face in ensuring that we would be able to form a constitutional republic with all of its checks and balances? And then the second part is,
Hold on. Sorry, just a second.
You'll answer the first one.
I'll answer the first question. So the first question is with respect to getting to a constitutional republic. Well, like I said, some very bright people have already drafted an interim constitution which is in the form of a constitutional republic, built off the US, but with more checks and balances. The concept would be that that interim constitution would serve as a transition from a province to a country. But during that transition period, at some point, there would be a full constitutional conference in which different forms of governance would be discussed, agreed to at the conference, and then held out to the public for a vote on which form of governance would you want. So is it the Swiss form that Mitch is talking about, or is it a constitutional republic that, along the lines of what we've already drafted? That'll be up to the public to make that decision. What's the second question?
And then how does our portion of the Canadian national debt get worked out? Hopefully we take nothing.
Yeah, well, yeah, what portion of the national debt should we take, which is in the order of about 1.3 trillion? Well, we've given 800 billion already and haven't received a cent in return. Perhaps we don't take any of it, but this would be subject to negotiation. Yeah, and as Mitch points out, you know, there's going to be a number of negotiating points. You know, the debt is going to be one. There's the issue of the 360 or so billion dollars in the pension plan, which should come back to Alberta according to the way the Pension Act was originally conceived. So, and then other things like border security and, you know, provincial policing and the cost for various things. These will all be subject to negotiations, but the issue of the debt, I always find kind of funny, because all I would say is I would sure like to be at the negotiating table negotiating that darn debt. Anyhow, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnyville. You guys rock. You're the best. See you next time.
Thanks, everyone. And merchandise table and the membership table is open for another 20 to 30 minutes. So thank you for attending.
Good turnout, Bonneville. Good turnout. I put that on my chips now. All right, you all, thank you so much for watching. If you could please subscribe. If you could hit like before you go there and subscribe, I would appreciate it. I'll try to go to as many of these as I can.
See you online.
We'll see you online. You have a good night. Thank you.
I want to watch this live stream. Where do I go?
The channel is called PJ the Belt. PJ the Belt. Yeah, do you have your phone on you? You might find it right now. I'm live right now.
As a bull when you.
Yeah, it's a bull head with red eyes. It's, yeah. If you go on YouTube, yep.
What? YouTube.
There.
Okay.
Yep. Just put PJ the Belt. I'm live right now, so. Yep. Just put PJ the Belt. Yep. I'm still live. I've still got. Yep. Should be a bullhead. There you are. Yep. And see, we're live still.
Is this?
Yeah, that's it. I would subscribe so that you can keep, you know.
Subscribe.
Yeah, it's right there at the top. Right there.
Oh, right there.
Yep. There you are. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Because I just remember everything that was said, and I'm sure that you caught
Yeah,
it.
it's all here. We've been live streaming for almost 2 hours now.
Oh, wow.
So yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming out. I appreciate you. Thank you. All right, people are going. PJ the Belt. PJ, yep. Nice to meet you. Well, I'm still live. You okay with that? There you are. Yeah, we're still live. Yeah, we had like 500 people watching us at a certain point. So yeah, a great turnout here. I didn't expect so many people in Bonneville. That's crazy.
Yeah, big oil and gas and agricultural presence here.
People are ready to go.
Trying to spread the word, man.
That's it, man. That's it. That's all we can do. Thank you so much for coming out. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Take care.
You too. We're in a hockey rink. All these chairs here were full. I would say there were probably
400, 500 people or so, I would say, because there were also people standing. But I was trying to also get the, let me see if you guys can see me. Oh, there we are. I was also trying to get what was being said. We are representing Alberta independence. Can you guys see me okay there? Or in the glasses, because can't read without these things. So thank you all so much for watching. I really, really appreciate you guys. Yeah, this one is the Alberta Crest hat. I got a few of these. I got my wife designed it. She designed it. I got 5 of these. But this is my favorite one, the darker one. Yeah, just in the descriptions, you guys can see them. Thank you all so much for watching and for your support. Thank you to all of the Albertans. Thank you to all of the Americans that are watching. You guys are awesome. Alberta will be free. We're going to have a referendum. And I know that we'll get this done. There's so much support. It's crazy. Every single one of these that I've attended, even in tiny towns where there 1,000 people live there, 200 people show up. It's 20% of the population. Again, not counting the children, because most people don't bring little kids to this kind of stuff. And then the people that are working. This is on a Monday? It's Monday. I mean, it's 7, but still, it's on a Monday. There's people who work after hours. Well, but it started at 7, you know what I mean? So there's people who work after hours, people who do overtime, especially because times are tough. So there you go. Shout out to Michigan. Shout out to Montana, all of the Americans watching. Thank you guys so much. All of the Albertans out in Lethbridge, Southern Alberta, Central Alberta, Northern Alberta. Love you all. I'm gonna try to get some interviews with the main guys from the Alberta Prosperity Project. Let me see if I have any luck, guys. Oh, they brought donuts too. Oh yeah, Sanji Lee. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. You best believe I'll be there. Albertans Day? Heck yeah, I'm going. I'm bringing my holiday trailer. I'm bringing my Alberta flag. I hope to see you all there. It's gonna be huge, guys. It's gonna be huge. There's gonna be Tamara Lich is gonna be there. You're going to have Christine Anderson, the German freedom-oriented MPP or MP, member of the European Parliament. I hope to see all of you there. I'll come and shake your hand. I would love to see you all. Bring your Alberta flags. Bring your Alberta flags. Don't show up with any maple leaves. Bring that blue flag, please. Oh, thank you guys so much for the super chats. You guys are way too generous. Thank you so much. Beautiful drive on the way here. I live in Central Alberta. This Bonnyville is more northeast on the way to Cold Lake. Beautiful drive. It was nearly 3 hours, but gorgeous drive. Holy cow. It's just beautiful because it's hilly here. It's not so flat like where I live. There's hills. And also, there's so many lakes. This area is called Lakeland. There's so many beautiful lakes. There's a place called Muriel Lake. It's freaking gorgeous. I'll probably get some footage there on my way back, so you guys see just how beautiful this part of Alberta is. We have beautiful freaking province, guys. This will make a gorgeous country. Gorgeous country. Switzerland will have nothing on Alberta. Not just economically, but beauty. Just, Alberta's gorgeous, guys. All right, guys, I'm going to try to get some interviews with the leaders of the Alberta Prosperity Project. Thank you so much for watching. I'll come back to you with another video tomorrow and the day after. See you all later. Love you all. Bye.